Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 379 for Monday, December 8th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including a video version that goes out on YouTube and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixlriffs, and joining me from the silver screen, it's Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, and the big colorful screen at home too. I've been watching Stranger Things on Netflix. We've been talking about going to the movies, what movies we want to see in the new year, plans for additional theater visits in the new year. I think I might check out Avatar Fire and Ash later on this month. So lots of cool stuff happening in the Render Distance, which is the extended version of the podcast that our patrons get every single week. If you go to the Spawn Chunks on Patreon, then you can join, become a member, and get access to extra recordings, things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which we had earlier in November, as well as quarterly hangouts. And you get to hang out with us live here every week when we record the show on Discord. And you also will be able to record, or at least be around when we record live, the bonus episodes that we record over the holidays. So coming up with the next couple of weeks, we sit down and record extra episodes that are pre-recorded for the Mondays that happen over the holidays. So they're going to be email focused. So if you've got an email question, it's a great time to write in, because coming up in the next week or so, we're going to be recording those extra episodes. And it's always great to have more email in the inbox to sort through. So check it out, the Spawn Chunks over on Patreon.
Yes, and this week, with Mounts of Mayhem basically releasing tomorrow, we are going to be reading the shortest pre-release changelog ever in the news. Trust me, it's worth sticking around for. But first of all, we're going to do our quick login like we normally do and talk about what's new in our Minecraft lives. Joel is going to kick us off this week. What's new on the Citadel?
So I've been experimenting with different floor blocks and ideas for the base level for the command center, and kind of narrowing it down between things like the tops of Blast Furnace, which are kind of dark, or the tops of Polished Andesite. I'm trying not to break the block palette too much. I think the walls might be white concrete. That's kind of what I started with as just like a temporary build, but I've grown so accustomed to it, I think I like it. And the challenge is lighting things up to make it look cool and also make it not look like a dark cave. I don't have to worry about mobs because I'm on a Mushroom Island, but I also play with shaders and I don't want it to be this dark, dank kind of empty space. I want there to be quite a lot of light around. So looking at lighting things a lot from the bottom. So certain parts of the build are going to have like glass in the floor. I'm thinking about doing some build stone, I guess it's called now, where you add a lot of motion to things. I've got to be careful with how I do that though, because I don't want it to be something that you can hear constantly. So if I'm using pistons or trapdoors, I've got to make sure that they're far enough away that you can't actually hear them. But I got the idea, I think, from Dan in my chat about making something that looked like a Star Trek warp core in the middle. And I think that would be kind of a fun thing to look down at from a glass floor with like cascading lights. The only thing is, like, I'm not a big fan of the texture of redstone lamps. So I might try to do it with copper bulbs. I don't know how possible that's going to be. I could double pulse them, I guess. But the other thing I thought about would be not just having things be lit up, but also have it be something that moves. So if I can do it far enough away where you can't hear the pistons, I thought it would be cool to use frog lights and have pistons put blocks over the frog lights so you can't see them, and then reveal the frog lights and have that happen in like a cascading fashion. It'd be really tricky to pull off. I'd have to do some redstone. I might actually do that in a creative world. That might be one of the few things that I kind of go in and puzzle through in a creative world. Most of the time I do things live on stream, but it's been coming together. I've copied the doors. So I've taken the main bay doors, which I like, and I've copied those around to the different locations. And I've put in one of them, I put observers in the floor and added a little redstone clock so that the lights kind of blink across the midsection of the door. So it almost looks like a status light for like a mag lock or something that might happen in a sci-fi world. So I'm working on like little details like that. That will eventually be a pass that I make on the whole thing, where I can add a lot of that kind of stuff in. And then the rest of it has just been the very slow progress of adding panels to the wings. So the west wing now has at least one panel, 1.5, maybe if you talk about the front of it. And it's starting to feel substantial. Like when you look at the base now from the north, it's got faces on all the structures. I mean, there's still some holes, but it's got the main parts filled in, and it's starting to feel pretty chunky, which I like. I'm happy with that. The progress has been super slow because ghasts are super slow. However, I haven't tested against doing it on scaffolding by hand because I feel like it would still be prone to mistakes. And even though it's slower going with the Happy Gast, I feel like I get it right the first time. And it's easier to look over at the other side of the build, check to see that I've done it or made a mistake, and then fix it right there on the Happy Gast. It's a lot harder to do that when you're like standing on top of the wall that you're building and hoping that you're doing it right. And yes, I have FreeCam as a mod. There's a couple of different things I could do to look around and see what I'm doing. But that visually is also not the best from a stream perspective. Like if you're constantly popping your camera out and it just feels like you're building in creative when you do that.
Yeah.
So I'm sticking with the Happy Gast for now. And I think the most frustrating thing for me, which we'll talk about later today, is like when you get up there and you're on it and you realize you forgot a block. It's only 2 minutes until the nighttime happens. You get to sleep for visuals, or for some other reason you have to get off the Happy Gast. It's such a pain. Like once you're on it, it's fine. It's the real trick is like, well, now that you're off of it, you have to like get back on it again. So I've started to get pretty good at flying at full tilt at a Happy Gast and then clicking the mount button like the moment that I ram into it. And kind of like speed mounting the Happy Gast. I'm glad that works. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I overshoot it. But when it works, you're just like, okay, great. That's a little bit less painful than I thought it was going to be. Because nothing is worse than trying to land on a moving platform if you're trying to like actually land on the top of it. So, because I don't know about you, I'm curious. I don't stand on the Happy Gast and build. I continue to pilot it while I build. Like I don't actually just get up and walk around. Do you do it that way, or do you just kind of use it as like a flying seat?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm sat for the majority of the times I've used it. Like, occasionally, if I'm building up underneath something and I need to, like, crouch to click on stuff, if there's, like, some blocks that won't go together right unless you shift-click them, that kind of thing. Like, sometimes I've done that. But, yeah, I think the majority of the time I have been sat on the Happy Gast to do any of that large-scale detail work. I think it's slightly different when you're like below something compared to going up the side of a wall, maybe. But I think that's mainly because if you're below something and you rotate on the Happy Gast, a lot of the time the angle of your rotation takes you way out of position for the block you wanted to place. So those are the times I think I'll do it. Whereas if you're going up a wall and you're just sort of looking from side to side, you notice that part a lot less. But yeah, like I think in general, the Happy Gast is better used seated unless you absolutely have to get up and stand on it for the mechanics of whatever it is you're trying to build.
Yeah, I tend to strafe a lot with it. If I look side to side, I misclick blocks constantly. And it's because of the drift that it has. Like you turn faster than the Happy Gast does, so it kind of catches up to you. So there's this overshoot and settle, which is a term from animation, which is great for character animation, but terrible for first person aiming. So I tend to either build vertically or stay on the same line and kind of like build horizontally using the S and the D key or the A and the D key as opposed to looking with my mouse, which is again a skill you kind of have to learn. And I still press shift constantly to go down and then not go down. There's some things about the controls that I'm still trying to sort out and still trying to find the right mod to install that might give me more control. So I'd like there to be some hotkey remapping, but right now it just seems like the mod authors are just like, oh, I've just made it better, when they've made it better kind of, but it's still not what I want. So it's kind of like, well, I want full control. I don't want your version of what you think is best. So because I have different buttons, the way that I think a lot of people use command or control for sprint, and I use alt. So like there's a couple of different buttons that I want control over. So we'll have to see. But right now it's just a slow process of copying these things over. The good thing is when I log into stream, I don't have to worry about what I'm doing next. I still have 1, 2, 3 more panels to go to get everything in, plus the top parts, plus the floors, plus like the bottom sides of things. So like there's a lot of blocks to be placed. So I'm not really hurting for content. It's just a matter of, I don't want to say me being bored. It's more me being frustrated with spending 2 hours on the back of a Happy Gast. And then it's like, okay, that's enough.
Yeah.
So then I'll build a temporary sheep farm, or I'll go and I'll remove some mycelium from the area and kind of get that out of the way. I tend to spice things up in the stream, either at the beginning or the end, to be just like, oh, I'm just not ready for a Happy Gast right now. Let's move some dirt, or all right, that's enough of the Happy Gast. Let's go get some sheep and we'll make a wool farm. And I made one of the wool farms I watched Tango build on Hermitcraft this season, where they used the little hop that the wool takes to get it up above the sheep. So rather than having the collection of the wool below the sheep, you use a glass block and the old block elevator bug, where when the shears from the dispenser trim the sheep, the wool does a little hop above the sheep. And if the sheep has got a glass embedded in its kind of head, then the wool just continues to go up, and then you just use a water stream to collect it into a hopper. So, yeah, it worked out pretty well. I'm quite happy with it, and it's just a proof of concept. But like we're getting a stack or so a stream, which is fine. But when I go and make more wool for the different colors and put this, like whatever a wool factory looks like in a sci-fi world, it's going to be nice to know that I have a concept that works. I don't need it to be crazy over the top because of how long I'm spending in the area. I just need these things to work, and kind of plug away in the background. So that'll be a fun setup. And it was a fun thing to kind of explore and see if I could build from just memory. Like I remembered the concept and I remembered the mechanics, and I just kind of built it on my own to kind of see what I can come up with. So I'm curious to see what the final design, if I wanted to make it more compact, and I might have to refresh my mind on grass spreading techniques. Also, I need to find a way to completely house the sheep modules, because boy, the grass color in a Mushroom Island, which I know you were a fan of a couple of years ago on one of your series, it's green. Like
it's very cartoony, which is what the aesthetic I was going for was very kind of like Disney Pixar. I think it was decidedly vanilla season 5, which was the last season I was part of that server. And the Mushroom Island grass color feels like you have to build like Looney Tunes cartoony, like very kind of colorful and bright. And so with the sort of more subtle sci-fi aesthetic, it's going to look very out of place unless you're using it for like toxic sludge or something instead of grass.
Right. I could maybe take advantage of that. I don't have a texture pack that puts grass blocks with a side on them. That I use moss for that, and moss is still very much the same kind of like more apt kind of green grass color. So I'll have to consider that. It would be, maybe we'll have like a radioactive sheep farm. That could be kind of fun.
Mutated sheep of some kind. Yeah, and maybe that's a good reason to have like a Jeb sheep in there, that it's like constantly changing colors because it's had too much radiation poisoning or something like that. Who knows?
Maybe I could make sheep glow with a texture pack or something like that. Or well, I guess there's the spectral arrows. Is that the only way to make?
The glowing outline. Yeah, I think that's the only way you can do it in survival, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be kind of a fun. Maybe I could add something to the resource pack or the texture pack that makes the sheep like light emit or something.
Yeah,
kind of funny.
It's funny, like Fallout style. Yeah.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week?
Well, you and I have no shortage of big things to do on stream, because whenever I'm on stream, I log in and I dig in the beacon mine for another couple of hours. But the latest layer of it is now complete. This is another basically 100 by 100 area that I was digging out in service of the copper aging facility, and this is the one that I found 2 zombie spawners in. So I'm not going to go straight to the redstone building phase again, because I'm looking to maybe design something that will help me farm drowned here so I can get hold of copper very locally to the farm. I still haven't figured out whether the reinforcement mechanic is robust enough now that it'll be worth doing that. But in the meantime, I've at least cleared out this area and varied it slightly from the previous area, because I did the last few layers using moss. And having done that with mines where I've dug out like an entire vertical chunk, that always worked out fairly well for me and was quite fast. When you're digging out an area this large, though, it still feels like it takes forever. And of course, you can only do 1 layer at a time, as opposed to previously I would dig 2 layers down and just mine whatever was like at, eye height and knee height for me. And so, having done this area, I think it was still faster than just mining straight deep slate for the last couple of layers, which always slows you down even with haste. It still took a really long time, but I think I was able to get like 3 layers worth done on roughly a 3-hour stream, compared to, I think I did the last 2 layers of the previous area, and it took me longer than the length of a stream, and I had to basically come and finish it like between streams.
Wow.
It still took a long time. So I'm debating whether I should bother with a drowned farm. In the meantime, I can start digging out the next area, because there are some areas adjacent to this that I still need to build, like the sideways extensions of the copper aging facility. If I'm building the full thing, it needs about twice the area that I have now, which is huge. But I've got the time and I can dig. So I will do that. In the meantime, for the Survival Guide episodes, I spent a little bit more time messing around with bedrock blocks because I tricked an end gateway into generating in the void. This is a technique I've studied in the past, and I managed to dig up a tool that was sent to me by N. Collier, who I'm not certain if they post too much other stuff online, but at the time when I was messing around with this in Survival Guide Season 2, I think, they sent me this tool, which I put in the resource mine channel in our Discord, where we store all sorts of like useful links to useful tools that help you build shapes in Minecraft and that kind of thing. And so I found the link that I had posted to that, because that lets you plot the vector on which it will generate the return end gateways that form on the outer ring of islands in the end. And it shows you all of the chunks that Minecraft will search in order to try and find the closest area of endstone to the central island. And as long as there are blocks in each of those chunks, like you typically want to put transparent blocks there so the game doesn't try and like spawn stuff on it or potentially treat it as an area to generate the end gateway, you can basically decide where you want that line of chunks to stop and put a little area of endstone there, and it will spawn the return end gateway in the middle of the void instead of on the outer ring of islands. It will basically think, oh, there's a large landmass here that we don't want to spawn the gateway in the middle of that. It needs to be on the outer edge of an island. So you just create a little like area of blocks for it, and it pops it down there. So I did that on a diagonal, which was probably the hardest part of the entire thing, because I was sort of bridging out with leaves and trying to make sure that I stayed on the same line to allow for all of these like different chunks to have blocks in. Some of them across chunk borders as well, so I had to be pretty careful about that. But once I got it there, I decided, now that we're fairly well acquainted with breaking bedrock, let me break all of the bedrock blocks around the outside of this end gateway and do a custom design for it. So I've encaged it in purpose stairs and got these two shapes, which I was planning to just be kind of like decorative flourishes. And then I sent this picture to XP, who I do the Hermitcraft recap with, and he said, yeah, nice of you to put arrows on it so you can see where it is. And I went, oh yeah, it does kind of look like an up arrow and a down arrow that's pointing towards it. But the alternative, of course, if I left it completely blank, would be trying to find a single square, like a 1x1 block of like this sort of end portal texture in the middle of the void, which already looks kind of similar. And like you just have to spot the parallax effect from 30 blocks away so that I could go into it. So maybe having arrows pointing to it was ultimately a good idea. But yeah, as I was doing this, I realized that if I wasn't building something that still looked like an end gateway, like I wanted it to still feel at least a little bit inspired by the design of the bedrock blocks, I thought if I left this completely vacant of other blocks around it and just left a platform for the player to spawn in on, you could transport happy ghasts this way, because if there's nothing interfering with them flying into and intersecting with the hitbox of the end gateway portal, then you could theoretically use that as a way to zip them from the central island to the outer islands if you wanted to transport some stuff around. Maybe bring a shulker back that way or something like that. So I've got my eye on doing that with a couple more end gateways and just using that as the most practical way of getting rapid transport to and from the outer end, with potentially like a shulker if I want to build a shulker farm in the overworld, or bring them back so I can get the levitation effect for how did we get here, or any of those little projects in the future. But I'm kind of curious how robust that is and whether I'll be able to. Yeah, I can definitely warp through with the Happy Ghast as the player is riding it, and it's only a little bit glitchy on occasion when it just doesn't load the chunks properly. But I'm like, can I then extend that to bringing villagers with me in a boat and start a village out in the End Islands like I did in Season 1, or like a few little projects like that suggest themselves, as long as it's safe to bring passengers and all of the chest boats leashed to the Happy Ghast along with you when you travel through those end portals. But now that I know how to break bedrock very consistently, I think it's a really neat way of opening up more mechanics like that to explore the outer end. And it's making me wish, honestly, for a better fast travel system if they ever consider that for a future end update. Because, yeah, I really like the idea of base building in the end, and it's just that there's no real easy way of doing it right now. It takes a lot of effort to get out there with anything other than just what the player can carry with them.
So what's the advantage of using this instead of just one of the regular end gateway portals? Like, is it closer, or is it, does it push you farther away?
This one is closer to the central island, and it spawns you. In this case, I can create an environment that's just got no terrain around it. So, like, I can build custom stuff out there in the void, kind of similar to when we were looking at our communities builds in our recent hangout, and somebody had built like a giant, like a Stargate spaceship out in the void of the end. I'm thinking something like that. If you want to build that stuff in survival, then you've got the void between the central island and the outer island to build a lot of stuff in basically like 600 or 700 blocks worth of empty space. If you wanted to have an Enderman farm out there that you could just warp to, and it wasn't connected to the central island in any way, so it's at no threat if you respawn the dragon, or you don't have to spend all of the time working out how you get to and from void level. You can just sort of teleport there. These gateways will spawn anywhere down to about Y15 as well, so you could literally just have like a ladder leading down from that straight to an Enderman farm. Or if you were clever with how you built the spawn platform, you could have it basically warp you into the one spawnable block for the player in an Enderman farm, and then the Enderman just drop in from somewhere else. There's a few different options for it, but I was also thinking map art, because when you make a glass floor in the end and you put blocks around it, the glass doesn't render on the map, but it makes the area transparent instead of a map of just the void of the end. So you could use that to create like posters and things that are sort of partially complete, and little aesthetic details that you can put out there. And so I thought, with this being a fairly artistic version of an end gateway, what if this is like the map art area? And even if it was like full, 128 by 128 map art, I can build it here and not feel like I'm flying past it in the overworld every time I go from A to B. So there's a lot of different options, and I just like to keep my options open when it comes to that stuff. But this is just a fun little mechanic that really capped off my messing with Bedrock mini-series, because I've done the Nether Roof now, I've done Breaking Bedrock, and now I've done this. And we've done something, it feels like, in every dimension that sort of leads itself into these mechanics quite neatly.
Right. I didn't realize that you could get this to spawn far enough away from end islands that they weren't even in render distance. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So it really gives you a clean slate.
In the screenshots I provided, the only reason you can see the end islands in the distance is that I've got my render distance up to like 24 chunks. And so if that was down to like 16, it'd be completely surrounded by the void. And,
that's really cool.
There's definitely no Enderman spawning anywhere near that as well. So I have to be very careful where I place solid blocks and make sure I light everything up as I go. But yeah, the upshot of that is you could create something entirely custom out there in the end and make your own end update in the meantime while you're waiting for Mojang to do theirs.
Well, that's something that I was looking at doing for the sci-fi area, is some custom map art, because like I could make computer screens, I could make buttons and switches. I had demonstrated it really quickly on stream by flying out over the ocean, making a completely blue map, and then putting item frames and maps over lights because we don't have a blue light, right? Yeah. So I could cover frog lights in a blue map, and it sort of looks like a blue lit up wall. It doesn't look like a light source because it doesn't have any kind of gradient or anything on it. But I could do something like that where I could control the lights. I was immediately thinking about doing a tileable pattern where you'd only have to do maybe 2 or 3 map art pieces to have that very distinct kind of cutout that you see in Imperial structures in Star Wars.
Yeah, where it's kind of like ovals and stuff in the background.
Yeah, they're not ovals. They're like long squares with rounded ends. Like they're not completely ovals. They've got straight sides, but it's this kind of cheese grater look to the back of things. And I thought, man, like if you had that where in the end, if they render transparent, then you could have map art with a hole in it. And then you could put a light source behind it. And then with shaders, that light source is going to be emitting light and it's going to show as bright white. And like you could do some really, really cool stuff. I guess it depends on how much of the light texture you want to show through. So there's a couple of things that you might want to mess around with. But you could also just leave those sections white and add like a layer in your map art to indicate like a pixel shadow. Like there'd be a lot more control. And I've been wanting to get more into pixel art anyway. So that could be something really fun to like design in Aseprite or Krita or something, and then take that pixel art and then copy it over into Minecraft. It's the thing that I don't like about the map art in Minecraft is the 128 by 128.
Yeah, like, it's a big canvas for sure. Yeah.
The good news is if you're doing something that's 16 by 16, like if you want it to look like a Minecraft texture, then you're just going to be placing chunks of blocks. Like each single pixel block that you place is not going to be different. There's going to be like big like 4x4s and 8x8s of like certain blocks.
Yeah. And honestly, ever since cartography tables and being able to lock maps, you only ever need to have one area that's dedicated to it as well. So if I made a glass platform in the void, I could just use that over and over again. So that's all to think about for the near future. But for now, I need to get into the news because we got a lot of pre-releases and release candidates to cover for the Mounts of Mayhem drop, which is of course arriving tomorrow, including one that our community has just let us know has popped up while we've been recording. So we will briefly cover that. But first, we'll do these in order. Minecraft Java Edition 1.21.11 pre-release 4 was published on Monday, December 1st. The changes in pre-4 are that the attack range extension for players in creative mode was once again set to 2 blocks. There was an accidental change that needed to be reverted, which increased the range to 4 or 6 blocks in certain cases. Dispensers can now equip saddles and Nautilus armor onto tamed Nautiluses and zombie Nautiluses. Dismounting a Nautilus or zombie Nautilus while on land no longer places the player inside the Nautilus as long as there is a valid block to place the player on. If there is no valid block, the player will be placed inside the Nautilus as before. The datapack version increased to 94.1, which introduces the minimum creative reach and maximum creative reach fields, allowing players to set custom attack ranges in creative mode. Fixed bugs of note in pre-release 4, zombie villagers spawning as the variant matching the biome at the central world coordinates of 0, 0, 0, the zombie Nautilus drops not being affected by looting, item frames and paintings popping out when in the same space as a stationary Happy Ghast, boats and rafts also breaking off paintings and item frames, and waypoint modifications resetting upon death. There's a couple more bug fixes in that pre-release. They're in the changelog on Minecraft.net. Pre-release 5 was published on Wednesday, December 3rd. There's just a few fixed bugs in this one. The enchantment glint was extremely bright on items with animated textures. Charged attacks from spears held in the offhand could disable shields while holding an axe in the main hand. Dolphins no longer followed players in boats, and zombified piglins stopped sprinting after some time while chasing the player. We moved on to release candidates as of Thursday, December 4th. The changes in release candidate 1 are simply an increase to the duration during which the spear can deal knockback while charging, and the charge attack animations now better correspond to the different phases of the spear. No other bug fixes, just those two changes. This was all absolutely trumped by release candidate 2, which was published Friday, December 5th, and it just says, fixed a crash. No other details, no bug reports, nothing like that, just fixed a crash, and that was it. As for release candidate 3, that one literally just came out as we've been recording this, so Monday, December 8th. There are 3 fixed bugs in this one. Transparent item models not rendering correctly, zombie Nautiluses generating in ocean ruins were not persistent, and zombies, skeletons, and zombie horses could catch fire from light sources when exposed to the sky in an arid biome. So we'll have links to all of these changelogs and pre-release versions. You can find those in the Minecraft.net articles, which are linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Speaking of Minecraft.net articles, there was another article that came out on December 2nd, Minecraft's new version numbering system. With Mounts of Mayhem coming soon, we felt it was time to update how we version our Minecraft releases to reflect our game drops strategy. Going forward, we'll be numbering our versions based on the year. So for both Bedrock and Java Edition, version numbers in the year 2026 will begin with 26. Now, Bedrock and Java have different release cadences, so the number that follow 26 will be different. There are a few reasons for this, such as platform limitations and the fact that Bedrock has more frequent releases throughout the year, but the shared prefix will make it easier for creators and players to know which release is which. There will be some small changes to how we name our snapshot versions in Java 2. Moving forward, we'll include the intended version of the names, so it'll be easier to see which snapshot contains features for which drop. For example, the first snapshot for Mounts of Mayhem was 25W41A, but would have been 25.4 snapshot 1 in this new system. To read the full article and the version numbering changes, head over to Minecraft.net, and you can find that link in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So this was probably the biggest news, considering that Mounts of Mayhem is just in the process of being polished, these new version numbers. And I've heard enough people complain about being unable to separate hotfixes from gameplay drops and named updates that I think it's probably a good thing that they're adopting the system now. It also gives us a few fewer tongue twisters on this show, about which I'm personally quite happy. And the new system seems a lot easier to remember. I think it makes more sense for Mojang's aim to continue updating Minecraft for the foreseeable future. And it eliminates the sort of fairly tired debate of, why is it always 1. This? When is Minecraft 2.0 going to arrive? That kind of thing. I think the main challenge around this now is going to be communicating to newer players why the version numbering changed and when, and talking about older versions as being 1.26 is going to feel, or 1.21 or whatever, is going to feel a little different to talking about something as 26.1, 26.4, and whatever in perpetuity. So I think it's going to be an adjustment period, as it is for these things usually, but I've not seen too many people push back against this change.
I think as a Java player, it's going to be more straightforward. And I think that keeping things with the year is great. It keeps Minecraft as a perpetually updating game, right? Like there's 26, 27, 28, like for a beautiful, bountiful future of updates, right? Like it's just going to kind of go on.
Until they hit 100 years and it cycles back around and they're like, what do we call it now? Yeah.
When Minecraft is beamed into everybody's brain.
In 2020, 2125 or whatever it may be.
Wild. Can you imagine? That kind of stuff I think is going to be easier. Talking about snapshots is 25.4, snapshot 1, snapshot 2. You and I will probably quickly shorten it to snapshot 1, 2, 3, because once we know the version we're on, until that drop comes out, it's just going to be the version of the snapshots, right?
For sure.
So that's going to be good. We might even know a name. Like if they, the Mounts of Mayhem, if they give us the name earlier, we could just say Mounts of Mayhem, snapshot 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be a lot easier to follow. The thing that confuses me is the different schedule for Bedrock. And I understand that Bedrock has got a different schedule and there's different hotfixes and things that have to go out, but they don't update the number system the same. It goes up in a 2-digit integer as opposed to a single. There's no extra decimal point. And so it is absolutely guaranteed that after the first update of the year, Bedrock will just slowly march farther ahead of Java, despite the fact that the content will be the same.
Yeah.
So if you look at the table, it goes from 25.10 on Bedrock and 25.1 on Java, which is essentially the same thing. Then it gets to 25.20 and then 25.30 for Chase the Skies in the table provided, but then that's only 25.2 on Java.
Yeah.
And so as it just marches on, it's just going to be more confusion, I think, as Bedrock players and Java players talk about the same game. I know in the description in the article, they said that there are platform limitations and a more frequent release on Bedrock. Well, I mean, a more frequent release on Bedrock, even if that's out of your control, you could still have it numbered in a way that when you get to the Chase the Skies update or like the major drop, they could be in line. I don't think it would be a big difference if in between drops, Bedrock and Java got out of sync, but then they synced back up on the big release dates. But this is going to be always out of sync. Now, the good part, I guess, silver lining, is that it should be consistent. Yeah. So it will probably be so Bedrock will be like .1, .3, .5, .7, we think. And then Java will be 1, 2, 3, 4. So there'll be some if it happens more than a year or 1 year, then we'll be able to see a pattern, but it's still not the easiest to explain to people. So I'm curious about how that's going to go. I had a really good explanation by Exumavoid, which I'll have his video linked in our show notes on the spawnchunks.com as well. And he was just as confused as to why they did it that way. Like it seemed an odd choice to make. So I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I think there needs to be maybe a lengthier explanation other than just like platform limitations. Like you're telling me that on Bedrock you can't have an extra decimal point? Like that seems strange to me. But again, like I'm not a programmer. I don't know the backgrounds of that kind of stuff. I'm not sure why you can't do that. But I mean, it's all better than 25W41A. So that's a win.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's, again, less tongue twisters and a little bit more information to kind of pass each time if we're talking about Bedrock and Java together. But I think it's funny thinking back to, I forget which update it was. It was either Village and Pillage or the Nether update, somewhere around there. There was this big push for Bedrock version numbers to reach parity with Java. And by this time, that has been more or less completely abandoned because, of course, both versions need updates at different times, and the version numbering is the way it is at this stage. So yeah, I think it's quite funny that was sort of like, it was a goal they had at the time, maybe in terms of communicating when different versions were arriving. But ever since then, yeah, we're getting 26 point whatever to be like the releases that occur in 2026. So at least you can narrow it down to the year. But the version numbers are just inevitably going to be different, and that's sort of how it's going to happen regardless. Either way, I think it's also interesting in that it eliminates any concern for, like, well, when are we going to move on to the next big version number, and therefore when is the next big content update going to happen? And maybe this will allow some folks in the community to sort of reframe their idea of when we get big content updates and decide from the content that we're given, does this feel like a major update to you? You know, if they decide in a gameplay drop to add a bunch of stuff, you know, a new biome and everything, something like The Garden Awakens, does that feel like a major content update? Would that have been 1.22 for you? In that case, congratulations, go for it. But it allows the gameplay drops to more or less be any size they want without them feeling like, oh, we have to increment the major version number, and that's going to carry all of this weight within the community for people who care about the number side of things and what defines a major or minor update in Mojang's eyes being different from the community's eyes. This feels like it levels the playing field when it comes to content drops. So I think I'm fairly happy about that change. I think it's just going to hopefully make communication across the board easier once everybody gets used to the new numbering scheme.
And I think it gives Mojang an opportunity to make major changes to the game over time. Yeah. So instead of, everybody is thinking about something like an end update. I'm going to throw that out there because I know a lot of people will probably write in about it. But if that were to happen, an end update does not have to happen all at once.
Yeah.
And by removing big number versions, you can just say like, all right, well, maybe the end update or the start of the end update happens halfway through 2027, 27.2. But that doesn't mean that 27.3 can't have changes made to the end. You could have something else. You could update a new mob. You can update a new crop or something like that in the overworld or something related. But you could still iteratively go back and say, well, we dropped the major change or the idea of change in the end back in 27.2. So we could potentially go and revisit that. And it gives you time, usually about 3 months, for feedback from players. They're like, oh, this is great, but like it would be really cool if. You know, it would be really cool if you did this or you did that, or you didn't do this and didn't do that. And I think that's going to be ultimately better for players because rather than Mojang dropping a major update with all kinds of changes and then getting feedback after the fact, they could start these changes and get feedback along the way. Because one thing I don't see them doing with the frequency of these updates is having any of these updates be particularly large.
Yeah.
We've seen them be smaller. And we've seen them be small and smaller. I've not seen them be massive. And I don't know that that's going to be a thing. I think it would be really odd to have something like update 26.2 be 3 times the size as any other updates in 2026, right? Like it would feel strange. Like, how do you make that more important? How do you make it feel more important? The only thing I can think of would be right now there's only 2 there's now 2 Minecraft live sessions a year. And so you could make a bigger deal out of a drop that's coming by announcing it and talking about it live on camera versus something like the Mounts of Mayhem or other drops that are a little bit like less exciting or things like Chase the Skies, or I'm trying to think about other updates. Spring to Life. Like that was just a straight up drop, right? That didn't have a lot of video stuff around it. And so you could make some updates feel a little bit more important by having a little bit more marketing around it. But I think that in general, it's just going to be a steady march, which will be something to get used to for players and for podcasters. But I think that ultimately it will be better. And I like it better than what Apple is doing So OS 26, everything's OS 26 across the board. The problem is that Apple updates everything in September. So did it come out in 2026? No. Is it released for most of 2026? Yes, but only by a month or so. So it's very, very odd to have the update be a number that is well ahead of where you are in the year. At least with this, updates that start with 26 will start in January 2026, provided that there's any kind of snapshot that early, or February, whatever. You're not going to have to think like, oh, well, Mojang updated something in late 2025, but because it's being released in 2026, it's called 2026. No, that's not the case. Like they seem to be snapshotting and releasing updates within the year. Case in point with Mounts of Mayhem releasing tomorrow, right? Like there's end of the year update, and then the news cycle starts again in January. It's very clean, and I like it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Saren in our live chat asked what the version numbering was going to end up being for the April Fool's versions, and I feel like those can just throw the rulebook out anyway, but I'm expecting the first one to be 26. Clown emoji or something like that. It's gonna really break the mold in terms of the new version numbers. The reason we're talking about this so much, I think, is because I don't really have a whole lot to say about the pre-releases for Mounts of Mayhem at this point.
No.
We've said our piece about the update and what we're excited for, or just kind of lukewarm on in general, and all the pre-release stuff looks good to me. I am probably going to update to Mounts of Mayhem tomorrow when it releases, because Survival Guide just moves forward at the same pace as the updates do. So my first job is going to be get familiar with the spear, and thinking back to that Drowned Farm idea, I might even try using the spear as a weapon to try and, proc reinforcements and target a lot of Drowned at once instead of having to use Sweeping Edge. But outside of that, the features will get to me when they get to me. Like, I'm not super concerned about that, but I've got big projects going on in the meantime that I can continue to focus on.
We're the same. I'm not going to be updating until all the mods and stuff are ready to go. So unless one of the server members is champing at the bit for a Nautilus or a Spear, then I'll look into updating sooner. But depending on that, I might just not skip it, but I might just wait until whatever update happens in 2026 to update the server. It's the only downside of running a slightly modded server with quality of life stuff, is that the cadence at which Minecraft is updated now is kind of hard to keep up with. It provides me with a lot of behind the scenes admin work, which I don't always want to do. And I did that with Chase the Skies as well. Like, I waited until the copper update to get Happy Ghasts. No one really needed them. So I think for me, I might be picking and choosing when I update, depending on how much I want to have access to the content.
Yeah, seems perfectly reasonable to me. We're going to move on into chunk mail for the week, because we got a little bit of stuff here. Of course, our mailbag episodes are going to be coming up over the holidays, so please do email the show if you've got a little short email to share, something, an observation, a question, anything like that. We'd love to get more email read over the month of December and celebrate the community with how much support we have received this year. So the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please do keep your emails short and to the point. It really does help us include them in the show more easily. And if you're a patron of the show, of course, let us know you're a patron in the subject line, and we can get a mix of patron emails and other listener emails. Joel is going to read us this first one this week.
First email is from Imperfect Imp. Subject is Camel-Powered Villager Curing. Hi, Pix and Joel. With Mounts of Mayhem about to release, there's some discourse about the Camel Husk and its riders. It's a very powerful combination of mobs, and they make deserts even more inhospitable. However, there's also a very practical use for these mobs that I haven't heard anyone mention. The Camel Husk provides an easy villager curing setup with a zombie and the Parch that shoots weakness arrows. I think Mojang is doing a great job with features that have more depth to them than they appear to have. What do you think? Imperfect Imp was shot by a Parched he didn't see because he accidentally made a darkness potion instead of night vision.
The Parched are going to be coming out of the darkness at you. I don't know how frequently I'm going to run into the Camel Husk, because most of the time I'm in deserts. I'm not lighting the area up because I'm there to farm sand, and I'm just going to break all my torches every time I sweep the next layer of sand away. So typically I bring a bed with me to deserts, and I tend to sleep a lot. So I don't think I'll run into the camel husk all that much. But I had not considered that, yeah, like the practical reality of the situation is that you've got one mob that can zombify things and one mob that gets you halfway to curing the villagers again. I almost said curifying. Like that's a brand new word for the Minecraft lexicon. So if you can get half of the curifying done with a parched shooting a weakness arrow at the zombie that the husk riding the camel has just zombified, then I guess you are halfway to a villager curing, yeah.
So will the parched shoot the zombie villager, or will you have to like kite it, similar to like getting a skeleton to shoot a creeper?
Yeah, it's something you'd have to finesse by positioning yourself with the zombie villager between you and the parched. And obviously the parched has a higher angle to shoot you from because they're on the back of a camel. So, yeah, I imagine at this point the villager is going to be in a minecart or something like that, and the camel husk is going to be stationary, because imagining doing this in any kind of like free roaming environment is going to be far too chaotic, I think.
Yeah.
Especially since the husk is going to be driving the camel towards the player, and the parched is going to be on the back of that camel, so you're rarely going to find an instance where you're not looking directly down the barrel of a husk wielding a spear. But yeah, I think with enough sort of finesse, you could probably make it so that this camel is like not turned around, or like you can get between the you can get the zombie villager between you and the parched, and probably get it hit with weakness. Either that, or you try and use the parched to farm weakness arrows. And there's ways you can do that by suspending them in bubble columns and things like that, so that they can be used to shoot a villager whenever before they despawn. But yeah, there's some interesting mechanics that could be at work there if you wanted to go that route.
I think it might be more trouble than it's worth, but it would have those kind of cred points of like, this is the 6th time I've done this, on a world. I'm going to try something different, for curing villagers, because as far as I know, the splash potion of weakness will affect like 3 or 4 villagers if you have them close enough together.
Anything that's within the radius, yeah. You just want to keep them separate so they don't all attack each other when they start curing, yeah.
Yeah, so if you've got the ability to brew potions of weakness, then you're probably going to be faster to doing it the old-fashioned way. But again, points for like if you had parched that were name tagged that you were moving around in or even if you had like, as you said, villagers in minecarts that are then zombified villagers in minecarts, and then you had a parched that was like constantly shooting at something. You know how some mobs get angry at snow golems, and so like you could have the parched trying to shoot a snow golem on the other side of the track, and all you have to do is put something in between it. Provided that your zombified villager doesn't take too much damage from the arrow that it dies. Like there's be a bunch of little fine tuning things you'd have to work out, but I think it could be fun. I like the idea and the spirit of the email though, in that you've got Mojang providing different avenues for things like this. And I do, even though I don't see myself like you running into the camel husk very often, I think that it provides, as well as the parched, I think it provides just like the idea to the player that these things exist. Like you can, 2 mobs can ride a camel, that weakness arrows are even a thing, right? Like if you were a brand new player, you wouldn't even know that weakness arrows were a thing until you got shot by one. Right. And so I think that kind of stuff is cool. Also, just husks and parched provide some really cool just aesthetic vibes. So like if you wanted to build a pyramid and like capture some husks and some parched and kind of like freeze them in your build somehow, and have like mummies and skeletons walking your hallways as part of like the vibe, that could be fun too.
Yeah, and they won't burn in the sun either, so you can sort of create this undead empire in the desert now if you want to. So a little bit of fun can be had there. And yeah, it feels like the main benefit of this as an idea is that it can be done without access to the nether, where you can already brew potions of weakness without nether wart, but you need blaze powder to fuel a brewing stand. So yeah, it's a fun approach. I don't see it necessarily being like the new meta when it comes to zombie villager curing, but still a fun alternative for people who've done the zombie villager thing over and over again. Our next email comes in from Tim S., who's a landscape artist member of our Discord community, has a quick Nautilus note for us. Hi Pix and Joel. As a Bedrock player, I'm looking forward to the Nautilus. Since doors get waterlogged on Bedrock Edition, exploring shipwrecks early game is way more difficult than it's worth. But with a Nautilus, I feel a lot more comfortable exploring those underwater structures. Tim didn't drown while raiding a shipwreck because he found a Nautilus.
I would imagine having a Nautilus to explore an underwater ravine or a waterlogged cave, provided that you have a way to get the Nautilus there, would be really useful on Bedrock, especially early game when you don't necessarily have an enchant on your helmet. You have to worry about breathing, and if you're a newer player or even if you're just a claustrophobic player and you're just, when you go underwater, under caves, and you've got something above your head where you can't actually surface and breathe, having a Nautilus with you for that kind of stuff could be really, really fun.
Yeah, this is a great use case for the Nautilus. I think I'm so used to Java mechanics that I forget that Bedrock players often struggle to find ways to breathe underwater. You're not always going to have magma bubbles like right next to an area with a shipwreck or something like that. And in Drowned Ruins, obviously, you have a couple of them, but you have other problems. So yeah, I think at this point, thinking about this, I'm quite surprised Java hasn't updated for parity with Bedrock and allowed for waterlogged doors. And I'm personally quite happy with things the way they are, but I sort of wonder why. And I wonder if maybe the Nautilus might be a stepping stone to removing some instances like that and encouraging players to take in the avenue of getting mob-based solutions to raiding underwater structures like that, instead of just bringing like a bunch of oak wood with them and crafting doors whenever they need a pocket of air, right?
Yeah, I tend to just mine into the side of something. Like if I'm in a cave and I'm starting to get low on air, I just kind of create a hole where I can just kind of surface and breathe briefly. But I'm definitely one of those players that doesn't really enjoy going underwater in caves. And in the few times that I've played like an early game snapshot, version of Minecraft, when I was exploring some stuff, when I was back to early game, really didn't like it. Like when you don't have the enchants and you don't have the gear, like it is not the best, especially if you don't have Depth Strider. Like it's really slow. And so even something as simple as diving for shipwreck stuff can be tricky. I lucked out when I was exploring for sheep this week, and I found a couple of shipwrecks that were just on the surface. Like I didn't have to go down more than 2 or 3 blocks in the water. They weren't on the bottom of the ocean or anything like that. So it wasn't that difficult to go get them, but I can see it being a trickier thing in different versions of the game.
I'm curious how it's going to affect Minecraft Bingo when I next go back to that, and if having a Nautilus to ride around on is going to be advantageous if you're trying to get hold of certain items. Could be an interesting challenge for sure.
We have a third email this week that we're going to spin out into our main discussion, and that came in from G, another landscape artist of our community. Happy tamed friends. If you're old enough to get that reference, then I want to know. Hello, happy ghasts have been added with a useful, if sometimes exasperating, feature of free roaming near the block that they were last interacted with when unmounted. I think many players would love to see that added to tamed pets like dogs, cats, and parrots. Personally, I'd love to see cats be able to lounge on beds and have birds flutter from tree to tree without the need of them following me. It would be something that would add a lot of more movement to builds. What are your thoughts? Cheers. G fell from a high place while trying to get a complete catalog. The cat was fine, though.
Yeah, cats do tend to land on their feet in these situations, and it's a good thing too, because having seen Doc M use a cat that's constantly like teleporting up to the top of a farm and falling, it seems to be, it'd be rather inhumane if it felt like the cat was going to take any damage from it. But yeah, I will address up front the staying on the subject of cats for a second, the cat roaming behavior, because cats do this already. I think a lot of the time I don't spend much time with cats in-game. It's because they sit on top of chests and prevent you from opening them. If you don't sit them down somewhere else, they'll find a place for themselves to sit, and more often than not, it's inconvenient for the player. Roaming
just like
cats,
real life.
yeah, pretty much. Roaming cats have a 4-block radius that they search for beds, furnaces, and chests. And they will lay down on a bed, and they do that when the player goes to sleep as well. The cat will come and like sleep kind of on you or next to you. But then they try to sit on furnaces, according to the Minecraft wiki. It's not something I've seen them do all that often, but presumably it's like the cat is trying to find a warm place to sit, like cats typically do. And so, yeah, I think most players don't see that kind of roaming behavior very often because animals are a lot more inconvenient when they roam around, and most players just tend to like sit them down as soon as possible and leave them in that area, whether as like an aesthetic thing or in the case of cats to ward off creepers, and the same with dogs and skeletons. Just provide a little bit of extra protection for a base build that you don't want messed with too much.
Yeah, I lost my first dog in Minecraft to it following me around, and so it wasn't free roaming. It was like right behind me, and I was digging a small pond at like 3 blocks deep, nothing crazy, and it ended up drowning underneath like an overhang. and I
yeah.
replaced it, but that dog has sat in front of its doghouse for 7 years because I just couldn't be bothered to have it follow me around again. And so I do like the idea of especially with dogs that are like in real life, you kind of use them sometimes in protection situations for like territorial. I mean, they did a lot with wolves and the armor update earlier this year or last year, which allow you to kind of have protection and stuff like that. So it'd be cool if they had some sort of guarding radius. I think that for me, I would want more player control. So the randomness of cats and sitting on chests and being in your face is very similar to like the wandering trader, you know, when you're just trying to do stuff and it's constantly popping up in front of you.
It's just like under your feet. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that would be a thing with dogs. I mean, dogs would do that in real life too. So like you'd be tripping over the things. And I think it would be nice if there was some sort of block that you could place that the dog or cat would just be like, okay, well, this is home base. And I will roam X amount of distance from here. And I mean, if you wanted that to be near your chests, well, then you have to deal with the sacrifice of a cat maybe sitting on your chest. But if you put it far enough away, then you could have a cat roaming around your bedroom. And if that's not where you keep all your chests, then that could be kind of fun. Same thing with a dog. It'd be kind of cool to have a dog running around a yard, patrolling a yard, but then like not going too far afield and not constantly trying to follow you around. I think the trick there would be like what block or what item would you use to then, you know, tune a dog to? Is it, you know, a bone in an item frame? Is it a bone block? What does that mean if you've used bone blocks in your build? Like which block does the wolf dog choose to be home base, right? So there's a couple of things there that might be tricky to do. But I think that could be something that could provide more control for players and still have that movement. Because sometimes it can be really tricky. So bees provide a lot of great movement, and having flying mobs provide a lot of great movement. But the range of a bee on beehives is a lot wider than you think. Yeah. I've got a couple of builds in West Hill that are next to each other, the West Hill River Inn and then just a house on the road. And it's like 20 blocks away. And the bee has chosen to pollinate the garden and then fly the 20 blocks to the beehives that I've used as decorative blocks in my kitchen in the inn. And they're now dripping with honey because the bee has flown in the window and stored the honey in the hives and then gone back to the flowers because the hive that I had built it in the garden of the house was full. And I did not anticipate the bee having a range quite that large. Yeah. I thought it was going to stick closer to the hive that it was calling home, right? I didn't realize that they just expanded and filled whatever hives were empty. So there are some things to consider depending on access. So like parrots, same idea, having birds flying around, like how do you control that? And how do you keep them from going too far or flying into something that you don't want them to fly into? So there's a couple of things that I think would be neat to explore, and I think they'd have to be careful. I think what players don't want is more RNG. Like I don't want more behavior like the Happy Ghast in pets. I don't want to constantly be trying to keep pets out of fire, lava, water, mobs. Like if they're roaming, you need to have some sort of failsafe where like they won't engage or they won't do things, because otherwise you're going to come home and your cat or dog might have died and you're not going to know why, because they weren't where you left them and you don't know what they did when you were gone, right?
They have recently made improvements to horse behavior so that they won't roam into sweet berry bushes or cacti as well. So It seems like they are sort of narrowing down some of the cases in which animals that players are going to get attached to will damage themselves. It seems like they're sort of eliminating some of those cases. But I agree. I think having a roaming behavior that feels a little bit more predictable, I suppose, would be a good thing. And it's difficult to cut the balance between making an animal feel like it's alive and it has its own sort of whims and wishes and that kind of thing, and preventing it from getting into trouble in the variety of situations that it could find itself in Minecraft. Because, you know, if you got an animal, it's unlikely that they do this because they're pretty good at not falling off of blocks. But you say you have a pet rabbit, they're pretty good at leaping from high places. You imagine a skyblock scenario in which you're trying to keep like a pet cat or a dog around, and you're building on a 5x5 island. They have a 7x7 roaming radius, and then suddenly your dog is close to walking off the edge of your skyblock island, or you like collide with it and nudge it, and then suddenly it's gone. You know, there's issues like that, I think, are going to come up because of the sheer variety of scenarios players can find themselves in. So I think the priority really is just adapting themselves to the default vanilla game and default vanilla landscapes and seeing how things shake out there, and players obviously getting used to that. But a lot of folks have been pointing this out recently, I think, because a lot of people have done a server reset recently, and people are picking seeds with more hilly terrain. Obviously, Hermitcraft is a big example, but I've noticed this happening in my own world as well. Mobs have a tendency to pathfind towards high ground, and this was also a notable issue with copper golems during testing, where they needed to stay around chests for their intended utility, but people found that they would tend to just walk up hills, prioritizing that over coming back to the area they were supposed to be working. And I assume that this is broadly intended to stop passive mobs like sheep and cows and whatnot from wandering down into caves that are on the surface, so you don't end up going caving and finding like there's a ton of chickens just hanging out in there. But it has the side effect, especially if you're building on like the flat plains sort of area and you're avoiding building on the hills that are much more common now the Caves and Cliffs update has passed and we've all got this like new expanded terrain. A lot of mobs end up pathfinding up those hills and resting on mountaintops. There, I think, is a donkey or a horse or something that has been up the Cherry Mountain at the sort of spawn area of Survival Guide since one of the early episodes. And I haven't gone and gotten it down because it's not mine. It was just there forever, mingling with the goats, I suppose. And even the horses that I've tamed, if they end up off the leash for whatever reason, I find them just sort of walking up to the nearby sort of snowy slopes hill that's next to my starter house. And we all just kind of get used to those sort of behaviors, but that's a mob pathfinding thing versus like a roaming behavior. So it's unlikely that they will find themselves coming back down to a home block the same way that happy ghasts have been programmed to have. And so I think maybe giving animals this concept of a home block, if they are pet animals like cats, dogs, tamed animals like horses, if they have a radius and then they think, oh no, I should probably return to that every so often, I think that makes a lot more sense. And I think the reason the feature is so noticeable with the Happy Ghast is that it's a flying mob, similar to bees. They can roam vertically as well as horizontally. And that's something that you notice way more than you would notice a dog or a cat just kind of wandering around, because they stay at ground level for the most part. And so, yeah, I'm curious if they added roaming behavior and that sort of homing behavior as well, roaming and homing, if that would be something players would really take note of, if it would be a massive under-the-hood change for something that really doesn't feel like you get a ton of benefit out of it in the long term.
I'm surprised there's not more restrictions on bees, because I really like the bee farm that I made near Westhill, and it's really cool to be on those paths as the bees are flying from their hives. The flowers are nearby. But it's a little bit stranger when you go to other sections where bees are just kind of like a nice little addition to a garden. It's not meant to be a big bee farm, because the bee, if it decides to search and find a flower on the other side of a house, will fly over the house like a kamikaze bee. Like, it will not just fly around and stay 4 or 5 blocks above the ground and keep it like that thing that you're going to notice. You really notice it when a bee is 40 blocks above the ground, going over the pitch of your roof. And sometimes if you've used flowering azalea in your decorations in your roof, like having vines and overgrowth and stuff like that, then they'll fly up there to pollinate, which is, again, it's cool that they do that for those blocks, but you have to really be careful what blocks you put in your build, because it will entice bees to fly very high, which probably isn't out of the realm of what a bee would do in real life, but bees aren't the size of footballs in real life. Yeah. So you don't really notice them that much if they're 40, 50 feet above ground, right? So yeah, it's definitely something that I see as nuanced, right? And I like you, I like the idea of having the blocks there for livestock as well. We actually had an email, I think, recently where someone said that it would be nice if horses, if they were saddled, wouldn't roam. So when you get off of one, it would stay where you left it until you got back on, and it would then roam around and well, I guess ride around with you on it. Whereas if it wasn't saddled, it would then be like, oh, cool, I'm not doing any work right now, I'll roam around the area as I would normally. And I like that idea. I also like the idea of something more basic, like having a hay block, a hay bale, or maybe a group of hay bales. I'm not sure if it's even possible, but we use things like beacons and conduits with a certain number of blocks around them to then elicit a certain response from the game. So rather than having a hay bale be something that a horse would be stuck to in terms of a radius, what if it was like a 3x3 or a certain shape, like a little beacon pyramid of hay, something like that you could do to keep them within a certain radius? Does it have to have line of sight? Maybe it only needs to see the top of it? Like, could you bury a hay bale pyramid and have that be like the homing beacon for cows and pigs and horses if you wanted it to be? That would be fairly easy to conceal in a build, and it would be pretty useful because I don't have very many livestock animals around Westell because they just walk outside of the farms, because I didn't want to put Minecraft fences or Minecraft walls everywhere. I wanted decorative, rundown, stone wall, crumbling borders to my farms. Mobs can just walk over those, right? There's stairs and slabs and blocks, and like it's really difficult to keep mobs in with using blocks without making it look like a fortress. So having that kind of control would be really, really nice. I think that it could be interesting gameplay as well. I don't know how you communicate that to a player. Like, I don't know how you indicate to the player that the horse will not roam that far from a hay bale. I like the saddle idea better, but then like you don't saddle cows, you don't saddle, well, I mean, you can saddle a pig, but like that's not typical. Like that's not usually how players would want to decorate, right? So I don't know what you do. I like the idea. I think we talked about this before. It was probably a long time ago, but the idea of having like a feeding trough or some sort of other block that's added to the game that would then, keep players or keep animals near those blocks. But then that, how much does that negate like the creative idea of building troughs and stuff like that? So it gets into that furniture discussion too, but I think there could be a little bit more control.
Considering that we already have systems whereby villagers will track to their points of interest at certain times of day, and now we have copper golems searching for both regular chests and copper chests, I wonder if enough refinement has been made to pathfinding to points of interest behind the scenes that it doesn't create as much like lag and stuff anymore, if it's less of a drain on the resources, and if that could be implemented for horses. Like, if you put a hay bale around a farm, does a horse or a cow or some other sort of livestock animal wander over there every so often, maybe like every 1,000 game ticks or so? They'll just search for the next hay bale and just track over to whatever it is that draws their interest. Even like a cauldron full of water or something, so it can look like a water trough for them. Things like that could be neat little interactions. I think the main problem comes from when players will use those in aesthetic situations where they don't want animals to get involved, and the animal will just wander over, because in the case of cows in particular, they can't be tamed, so there's no way of switching on or off a cow's AI as being more obedient to what the player is doing. And so you don't necessarily have like the domesticated cows. So if you wanted to decorate an interior of a place with hay bales and cauldrons, suddenly you end up with like 5 or 6 cows on your doorstep wanting to get in, like knocking down the door because you've decided to put those into like, a hay bale in the roof of a building, like you're trying to make a thatch roof or something like that. And suddenly all of the cows are just kind of gathered around it looking upwards. I'm curious where the borders are between gameplay that feels intuitive and sort of like, at least as far as the new player experience goes, feels like something that you'd naturally choose to do and something that, makes perfect sense. And then the stuff that interferes with the aesthetics that you're going after when you're in late game and you want to use blocks as like, camouflage their actual nature and use them for different purposes. Use a hay bale block as just like the right color and a gradient of some kind of build, and then suddenly if it's attracting animals, then it feels a bit less practical and a bit more kind of irritating. So there's a lot of subtlety to that, but I do think it's interesting to imagine a situation in which the animals stay as they are for the sake of their their utility to the player and the personality that they have right now, but little subtleties creep in to make them each a little bit more unique, so that sheep, cows, and pigs don't all feel like standard livestock animals that are just different remodels of the same set of behaviors, if they could be something a little deeper, ultimately. Either way, that's where we're going to end this discussion for today. Thank you folks so much for listening to this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any of our paid tiers gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. You can also participate in our Hangouts, where you get to learn the behind-the-scenes details of how the podcast is made and also share what you've been up to in Minecraft that month. We currently have 260 patrons as we begin December. That's down 9 from last week, so we'd love to see that number creep back up again throughout the holiday season. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, and That Penguin Dude. And a shout out to our new annual memberships for people who've signed up for one of those. That's Wolfen Jaeger, Miss May, Colorful Shoes, and Dan Grice85.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free. Just tell a friend about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. We are at the Spawn Chunks and all the social media that matters. New episodes are available on Mondays on your favorite podcasting app, as well as video versions that go out on YouTube and on Spotify. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch when I can. I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
I will point you all towards the Citadel Cafe, which is coming up on episode 500, recorded later this week, which will be our holiday roundtable. So there should be a number of people popping by the cafe. Fun conversations to be had there. I'm Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find. I'll point you towards TikTok, where I share clips from Twitch, where I stream Monday. No, sorry, not Mondays. I'm doing this show on Mondays. I do Tuesday through Saturday on Twitch, mostly Minecraft lately, but we do have a new Lego set that's happening on Fridays, and I'm looking forward to some new games coming out over the holidays as well.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but technically it's on version Infinity.1.